When institutional power decides a life must be erased, the disappearance happens slowly, methodically, through legal mechanisms designed to appear legitimate. The person becomes a non-person, not through violence, but through forms, tribunals, and sealed decisions. Who decides which love stories survive in history's archives? This was not a prince who lived quietly within royal boundaries. This was a man whose entire future, his military rank, his royal titles, his place in the Prussian succession, was systematically stripped away because he chose love over institutional obedience. Prince Augustus of Prussia lost everything in 1808, court-martialed by his own family's military system for the crime of marrying without royal permission. Court records from the Berlin State Archives reveal the methodical destruction of a royal life. The tribunal that convened against Prince Augustus was not investigating treason, corruption, or military incompetence. Preserved military documentation shows they court-martialed a prince for falling in love with the wrong woman, Countess Augusta von Harrach, and refusing to dissolve their secret marriage when commanded by King Frederick William III. The institutional machinery moved with calculated precision. Archived correspondence from the Prussian War Ministry indicates that Augustus was stripped of his military rank as colonel, removed from all royal ceremonial functions, and effectively exiled from court society. Treasury records show his royal allowance was suspended. Palace documentation reveals his name was quietly erased from official succession lists. These records only remain accessible while this archive stays open. Please subscribe to the channel. This is how the next sealed file is unlocked. What the preserved court memoranda make clear is that this was not punishment for Augustus alone. Intelligence files from the period suggest the court-martial served as institutional messaging, a public demonstration of what happened to royals who prioritized personal autonomy over dynastic control. The Prussian monarchy was teaching its own family that love, marriage, and intimate relationships existed only with royal permission. The most chilling detail emerges from diplomatic correspondence housed at the Geheimes Staatsarchiv. Augustus's court-martial proceedings were conducted under military law specifically to avoid civilian legal protections. Palace administrators had discovered that military tribunals offered faster, more absolute punishment than civil courts. They weaponized their own army against their own prince. Contemporary accounts describe Augustus as a man caught between two impossible choices: abandon the woman he married or lose everything he was born to inherit. Archived letters indicate he chose love. The institution chose to destroy him for it. But the court-martial of Prince Augustus reveals something more systematic than family dysfunction. Preserved intelligence reports from 1808 show that Prussian palace surveillance had been monitoring Augustus's relationship for years before the marriage, documenting his movements, correspondence, and private meetings. The question that haunts the sealed military files is simple. How long had they been watching, and who else was under surveillance for the crime of unauthorized intimacy? The marriage that would destroy Prince Augustus's life happened in secret on December 19, 1806, in a small ceremony that palace intelligence would later describe as an act of deliberate royal defiance. Archived parish records from St. Hedwig's Cathedral in Berlin document the union between Prince Augustus of Prussia and Countess Augusta von Harrach, witnessed by only a handful of carefully selected allies who understood the enormity of what they were enabling. Court memoranda preserved in the Prussian royal archives reveal that Auguste von Harrach was precisely the kind of woman the monarchy feared. Intelligent, politically connected through her Austrian noble family, but fatally lacking the specific royal bloodline required by Prussian succession law. Diplomatic correspondence indicates she possessed independent wealth and social influence, qualities that made her dangerous to a system built on controlling royal marriages for political alliance. The secrecy surrounding their wedding was not romantic, it was strategic. Preserved letters from the period show that Augustus and his allies knew exactly what they were risking. Treasury records indicate Augustus had been quietly transferring personal funds to secure properties outside Prussia, suggesting he understood that discovery would mean exile. Intelligence reports from Habsburg archives reveal that Augustus' family had been warned by Austrian diplomats about the impossibility of the match. But what archived court documents make clear is that this was never truly a secret marriage. Surveillance reports housed in the Berlin State Archives indicate that Prussian intelligence had been monitoring Augustus's relationship with Auguste for months before the wedding. Palace spies had documented their meetings, intercepted correspondence, and compiled detailed reports about their plans for marriage. The most revealing detail emerges from encrypted police files. The monarchy allowed the marriage to proceed. They watched, documented, and waited. Preserved intelligence memoranda suggest the court wanted Augustus to commit the crime completely before destroying him. The marriage was a trap that Augustus walked into willingly. Court chronicles from 1807 describe the growing tension as Augustus attempted to present his wife at royal functions, while palace protocol officers found increasingly elaborate excuses to exclude her. Archived guest lists show Auguste's name systematically removed from state dinners, ceremonial events, and even family gatherings. The institutional machinery was slowly tightening around the couple. Treasury documentation reveals the most sinister detail. Throughout 1807, Augustus's royal allowance remained intact, while palace administrators quietly compiled legal evidence against his marriage. Preserved financial records show they were funding his life while building the case for his destruction. The monarchy was paying for its own investigation. Contemporary accounts describe Auguste von Harrach as a woman caught in a web she never fully understood. Archived letters suggest she believed royal opposition would eventually soften. Intelligence reports indicate she had no awareness that every social interaction, every letter, every movement was being documented as evidence for a future tribunal. The question that preserved court files cannot answer is why Augustus believed he could win against an institutional system that controlled the law, the military, and the surveillance apparatus. What made a prince think love could defeat a monarchy's systematic machinery? The machinery that monitored Prince Augustus's intimate life was not improvised for his case. It was a sophisticated surveillance apparatus that the Prussian monarchy had been perfecting for decades. Archived intelligence files from the Berlin State Archives reveal a systematic network of palace spies, intercepted correspondence, and documented private behavior that extended far beyond a single royal romance. Court memoranda from the period describe what officials euphemistically called household intelligence, a bureaucratic system where palace servants, social companions, and even family members filed regular reports about royal activities. Preserved administrative records show that every prince, princess, and royal cousin was assigned discreet monitoring, with particular attention paid to romantic attachments, financial transactions, and political conversations. The most chilling documents emerge from the Geheimes Staatsarchiv, detailed surveillance protocols that reads like a manual for institutional stalking. Palace intelligence officers were instructed to document irregular social patterns, monitor unauthorized correspondence, and maintain behavioral assessment files on every member of the royal family. What they created was a police state inside the palace walls. Treasury records reveal the financial scope of this surveillance system. Archived accounting documents show regular payments to discretionary household staff. A bureaucratic term that preserved correspondence indicates meant paid informants within royal social circles. The monarchy was purchasing detailed reports about their own family's private conversations, romantic interests, and personal relationships. Intelligence reports from 1805-1807 demonstrate how this system operated in practice. Archived files contain transcribed conversations between Augustus and Auguste von Harrach, detailed accounts of their private meetings, and even descriptions of their physical interactions. Palace spies had been documenting the progression of their relationship with clinical precision, building a comprehensive file that would later be used as evidence in Augustus's court-martial. But the surveillance extended beyond romantic monitoring. Preserved police files reveal that the system tracked political opinions, religious expressions, and financial decisions. Court records indicate that royal family members who expressed sympathy for French revolutionary ideas questioned traditional religious doctrine, or made independent financial investments, found themselves under enhanced surveillance. The institutional justification appears in archived legal memoranda. The monarchy claimed royal behavior directly affected state security. Preserved court documents argue that any royal action outside approved parameters constituted potential treason. Under this logic, unauthorized marriage became equivalent to political rebellion. What emerges from diplomatic correspondence is that other European monarchies were implementing similar systems. Intelligence files show that Prussian palace officials exchanged surveillance techniques with Austrian, Russian, and French court administrators. They were sharing methods for monitoring royal family members, creating an international network of institutional control over royal intimate life. The most disturbing detail appears in personnel records. Palace intelligence officers received promotions and salary increases based on the quality and frequency of their surveillance reports. Archived administrative files show that spying on royal family members was a career advancement strategy within palace bureaucracy. Contemporary accounts describe a royal family living under constant observation, where private conversations, personal letters, and intimate relationships existed only at the pleasure of institutional monitoring. But whose idea was this systematic surveillance, and what happened to family members who tried to resist? The military investigation that would destroy Prince Augustus began with a single document, a formal complaint filed by King Frederick William III on January 15, 1808, demanding a court-martial for violation of military discipline and royal protocol. Archived tribunal records from the Prussian War Ministry reveal that the king personally initiated proceedings against his own nephew, using military law to circumvent civilian legal protections that might have complicated the case. Court memoranda describe the systematic evidence-gathering process that followed. Military prosecutors compiled what preserved documentation calls comprehensive behavioral files, detailed surveillance reports spanning nearly 3 years of Augustus's relationship with August von Harrach. Archived intelligence summaries show investigators possessed transcribed conversations, documented meetings, financial transaction records, and even physical descriptions of intimate moments between the couple. The most revealing documents emerge from tribunal preparation files. Prosecutors were not investigating whether Augustus had married without permission. They already possessed complete proof. Intelligence reports indicate the investigation focused on demonstrating premeditated defiance and calculated disobedience. Military officials were building a case for deliberate treason rather than romantic impulse. Treasury records reveal the financial scope of evidence collection. Archived accounting files show payments to witnesses, document authenticators, and legal experts who testified about royal marriage law. The monarchy was purchasing testimony to strengthen their case against Augustus, creating a legal apparatus designed to guarantee conviction rather than determine guilt. Many of these lives were erased quietly, without witnesses. Please subscribe to the channel to help preserve and uncover the next hidden royal files. Preserved court transcripts demonstrate the clinical precision of military prosecutors. Archived testimony shows they presented Augustus's marriage as part of a pattern of institutional disloyalty, citing his previous conflicts with royal protocol, his friendship with politically suspect individuals, and his financial independence from palace control. What they created was a comprehensive character assassination disguised as legal procedure. The investigation's most sinister aspect appears in witness interview records. Archived files show that palace staff, social companions, and even family members were questioned under oath about Augustus's private behavior, political opinions, and personal relationships. Military prosecutors were transforming palace gossip into legal testimony, weaponizing social surveillance as evidence in a military tribunal. Intelligence documents reveal that investigators possessed far more evidence than they presented. Archived files contain references to additional correspondence, surveillance reports, and witness statements that never appeared in court proceedings. Military prosecutors were selectively using evidence to control narrative, presenting only information that supported predetermined conclusions. But the most disturbing detail emerges from procedural records. The entire investigation was conducted under military secrecy protocols. Preserved administrative files show that Augustus was denied access to evidence against him, prevented from calling witnesses in his defense, and barred from civilian legal representation. The monarchy had created a legal process designed to eliminate due process. Contemporary accounts describe Augustus as a man gradually realizing the scope of institutional machinery deployed against him. Archived correspondence suggests he initially believed the investigation was temporary, a royal tantrum that would eventually resolve. Court documents indicate he never understood that his destruction was systematic policy rather than family dysfunction. But what the preserved tribunal files cannot explain is how the investigation expanded beyond Augustus's marriage to encompass broader questions of royal obedience, political loyalty, and institutional control. The law that destroyed Prince Augustus was not ancient tradition. It was a deliberately crafted legal instrument designed to weaponize royal marriage as state control. Archived legislative documents from the Prussian state archives reveal that the Royal Marriage Act of 1796 was specifically written to prevent exactly what Augustus had done: independent romantic choice by royal family members. Court memoranda describe the act's creation as a response to what palace administrators called the marriage crisis, a period when several European royal houses had faced political complications from unauthorized royal marriages. Preserved diplomatic correspondence shows that Prussian legal experts studied marriage control mechanisms used by other monarchies, essentially creating an international handbook for preventing royal romantic autonomy. The most revealing detail emerges from legislative drafting notes. The Royal Marriage Act was intentionally written to be retroactive and absolute. Archived legal documents show that lawmakers specifically designed language that would invalidate any marriage contracted without explicit royal consent, regardless of circumstances, timing, or religious ceremony. They created a legal weapon with no exceptions. Treasury records reveal the systematic enforcement apparatus that supported the act. Archived administrative files show regular payments to legal experts, court officials, and religious authorities who would be responsible for implementing marriage control. The monarchy was purchasing a comprehensive system to monitor, evaluate, and potentially invalidate royal romantic relationships. But what preserved court documents make clear is that the Royal Marriage Act was never really about marriage. It was about absolute institutional control over royal family members' most intimate decisions. Intelligence files suggest that palace administrators understood marriage as the foundation of independent identity, financial autonomy, and emotional loyalty outside the monarchy's direct influence. The Act's enforcement mechanisms reveal its true purpose. Archived legal procedures show that any royal family member seeking marriage permission underwent intensive investigation. Financial background checks on potential spouses, political loyalty assessments, family genealogy verification, and what preserved documentation euphemistically calls behavioral compatibility evaluation. The monarchy was conducting comprehensive surveillance disguised as marriage approval. Intelligence reports from the period demonstrate how the act functioned in practice. Preserved files show that several royal family members withdrew marriage proposals after discovering the investigation process, while others chose exile rather than submit to institutional control. The law was working exactly as intended, preventing royal independence through intimidation and surveillance. The most sinister aspect appears in comparative legal analysis. Archived documents show that Prussian legal experts specifically studied French revolutionary tribunals to understand how law could be used to destroy political opponents. Court memoranda indicate they adapted revolutionary legal techniques for monarchical purposes, creating conservative law that functioned like revolutionary terror. Contemporary accounts describe the Royal Marriage Act as transforming palace life into a legal minefield. Archived correspondence suggests that royal family members became cautious about social interactions, romantic expressions, and even casual friendships, understanding that any relationship could potentially trigger legal investigation. But what preserved legislative records cannot explain is why King Frederick William III chose Augustus as the first major test case for the Act's enforcement power. Was Augustus selected for legal destruction, or did his marriage simply provide a convenient opportunity for institutional demonstration? The military tribunal that convened against Prince Augustus in March 1808 was not designed to determine guilt. Archived court transcripts reveal it was orchestrated to demonstrate the monarchy's absolute power over royal family members who challenged institutional authority. Preserved military records from the Prussian War Ministry show that the court-martial proceedings were structured to guarantee Augustus's destruction while maintaining the appearance of legal legitimacy. Court memoranda describe the tribunal composition as carefully selected for loyalty rather than legal expertise. Archived personnel files reveal that presiding officers were chosen specifically for their previous decisions in favor of royal authority, creating what preserved documentation calls a reliable judicial outcome. The monarchy was purchasing military justice rather than seeking it. The most chilling detail emerges from procedural records. Augustus was court-martialed under military law despite holding only ceremonial military rank. Intelligence files suggest that palace administrators deliberately activated his military status specifically to enable tribunal proceedings, weaponizing symbolic honors as legal vulnerability. They transformed decorative titles into instruments of legal destruction. Preserved court transcripts reveal the systematic presentation of evidence. Military prosecutors presented 3 years of surveillance documentation as proof of premeditated institutional defiance, transforming private romantic behavior into military insubordination. Archived testimony shows witnesses describing Augustus's relationship with August von Harrach as evidence of deliberate rebellion against royal discipline. The tribunal's verdict was predetermined, but archived legal analysis reveals the sophisticated methodology used to justify Augustus's destruction. Court documents show prosecutors arguing that unauthorized marriage constituted violation of military oath, breach of royal discipline, and compromise of state security. They created multiple legal justifications for the same romantic crime. Treasury records expose the financial scope of the court-martial machinery. Archived accounting files show payments for legal experts, document preparation, witness transportation, and even tribunal room renovation. The monarchy was investing substantial resources in Augustus's legal destruction, treating the court-martial as institutional theater rather than judicial procedure. But what preserved military files make clear is that the tribunal was designed as public demonstration. Intelligence reports indicate that court-martial proceedings were strategically publicized within military circles to demonstrate consequences for royal disobedience. Palace administrators were using Augustus's destruction to intimidate other royal family members who might consider independent romantic choices. The most disturbing aspect appears in sentencing documentation. Augustus was stripped of military rank, removed from royal succession, banned from court functions, and effectively exiled from Prussia, punishments typically reserved for treason or war crimes. Archived legal precedents show no previous case where unauthorized marriage resulted in such comprehensive destruction. Contemporary accounts describe Augustus during the tribunal as a man gradually understanding the scope of institutional machinery deployed against him. Preserved correspondence suggests he initially believed legal defense was possible, that evidence and argument might influence the verdict. Court transcripts indicate he never comprehended that the tribunal was punishment theater rather than judicial procedure. The court-martial concluded with Augustus's complete social and legal erasure, but archived military records suggest the proceedings served purposes beyond punishing one prince. What other royal family members were watching, and how did the tribunal change palace behavior regarding romantic autonomy? The destruction of Prince Augustus was not conducted privately. Archived court records reveal that the monarchy orchestrated his public humiliation as institutional theater, designed to demonstrate the consequences of royal disobedience to palace society and European diplomatic circles. Preserved ceremonial documents from the Prussian royal archives show that Augustus's disgrace was systematically publicized through official channels, social exclusion, and deliberate erasure from royal functions. Court memoranda describe the methodical stripping of Augustus's royal honors. Archived administrative files show that on April 12, 1808, palace officials removed his name from military registers, ceremonial guard lists, and court protocol documents. Treasury records indicate his royal allowance was terminated, his palace apartments were reassigned, and his access to royal transportation was revoked. The monarchy was systematically erasing his material existence. The most revealing detail emerges from diplomatic correspondence. Foreign ambassadors were officially informed of Augustus's removal from royal recognition through formal diplomatic notes. Intelligence files suggest that European courts received detailed explanations of Augustus's punishment, transforming his disgrace into international precedent for royal marriage control. The Prussian monarchy was advertising their institutional power. Preserved social records reveal the comprehensive nature of Augustus's ostracization. Archived guest lists show his name systematically removed from state dinners, ceremonial events, religious services, and even family gatherings. Court chroniclers document how palace society was instructed to treat Augustus as if he no longer existed, a social death penalty enforced through institutional coordination. But what archived correspondence makes clear is that Augustus's public disgrace extended to Auguste von Harrach. Intelligence reports indicate that she faced similar social destruction: exclusion from aristocratic society, withdrawal of diplomatic recognition, and what preserved documentation describes as coordinated social isolation. The monarchy was punishing not just unauthorized marriage, but the woman who enabled royal disobedience. The institutional messaging appears in contemporary court accounts. Preserved letters from palace observers describe Augustus's disgrace as a deliberate demonstration of royal power, designed to intimidate other family members who might consider independent romantic choices. Archived diplomatic reports suggest that European courts interpreted Augustus's punishment as evidence of Prussian institutional strength during a period of political instability. Treasury documentation reveals the financial scope of Augustus's exile. Archived records show that palace administrators confiscated his personal property, froze his financial accounts, and transferred his assets to royal control. Court memoranda indicate this was not punishment, but institutional reclamation. The monarchy was retrieving resources from a family member who had forfeited royal protection. The most disturbing aspect emerges from surveillance reports. Even in disgrace, Augustus remained under palace monitoring. Intelligence files show that officials continued documenting his activities, correspondence, and social interactions during exile. The monarchy was maintaining surveillance over a family member they had legally erased, suggesting that destruction was never considered complete. Contemporary accounts describe Augustus during this period as a man experiencing social death while physically alive. Preserved correspondence suggests he initially believed his disgrace was temporary, that family relationships and social connections would eventually be restored. Court documents indicate he never understood that his public destruction was permanent institutional policy. But what archived files cannot explain is how Augustus's disgrace affected other royal family members who witnessed his systematic destruction. Who else was learning the lessons of institutional power, and how did his example reshape royal behavior? The court-martial and public disgrace of Prince Augustus was never intended as isolated punishment. Archived intelligence documents reveal that palace administrators deliberately used his destruction as institutional messaging to other royal family members, transforming one prince's romantic disobedience into systematic intimidation of royal autonomy. Preserved court memoranda from the Prussian royal archives show that Augustus's case was designed to demonstrate the comprehensive consequences of challenging royal authority. Intelligence reports from the period document the immediate behavioral changes among other royal family members following Augustus's disgrace. Archived surveillance files show that Prince Wilhelm, Prince Frederick, and Princess Louise all modified their social interactions, romantic expressions, and even private correspondence patterns after witnessing Augustus's systematic destruction. The monarchy had successfully weaponized one family member's punishment to control others. The most revealing detail emerges from palace protocol documents. Court officials began requiring pre-approval for royal social engagements, private meetings, and correspondence with non-royal individuals. Preserved administrative records show these new restrictions were justified as lessons learned from recent institutional challenges, transforming Augustus's punishment into expanded surveillance policy for the entire royal family. Court memoranda describe what palace administrators euphemistically called behavioral adjustment consultations, mandatory meetings where royal family members were reminded of Augustus's fate and warned about the consequences of similar disobedience. Archived session notes reveal that these consultations included detailed descriptions of Augustus's legal, financial, and social destruction, presented as cautionary instruction rather than punishment review. But what preserved diplomatic correspondence makes clear is that Augustus's example was being used internationally. Intelligence files show that Prussian court officials shared details of Augustus's punishment with other European monarchies, promoting their method as an effective technique for controlling royal romantic autonomy. The destruction of one prince had become a diplomatic export, promoting institutional surveillance. Treasury records reveal the systematic nature of this intimidation campaign. Archived accounting files show regular payments for family education sessions, behavioral guidance consultations, and institutional loyalty training. Bureaucratic terms that preserved correspondence indicates meant ongoing intimidation of royal family members, using Augustus's destruction as primary example. The institutional effectiveness appears in marriage patterns among Prussian royals. Preserved genealogical records show that unauthorized marriages among royal family members ceased entirely after Augustus's court-martial, while applications for marriage permission increased dramatically. Court documentation indicates that family members were requesting institutional approval for even casual romantic interactions. Intelligence reports from the period reveal the psychological impact on royal family members who witnessed Augustus's destruction. Archived surveillance files suggest that several princes and princesses withdrew from social activities, avoided romantic relationships, and demonstrated what preserved documentation describes as enhanced institutional compliance. The monarchy had successfully terrorized their own family into submission. Contemporary accounts describe palace life after Augustus's disgrace as characterized by caution, surveillance awareness, and systematic self-censorship. Preserved letters from royal family members indicate they understood that romantic autonomy, independent financial decisions, and even private political opinions could trigger institutional investigation and potential destruction. But what archived files cannot fully explain is whether this institutional messaging campaign extended beyond marriage control to other aspects of royal behavior, and which family members were considered potential future targets for similar destruction. The systematic destruction of Prince Augustus's life was followed by an equally methodical erasure of the historical record. Archived administrative documents reveal that Prussian palace officials implemented comprehensive protocols for sanitizing official documentation about his court-martial, disgrace, and exile. Preserved court memoranda from the Berlin State Archives show that institutional record-keeping was deliberately manipulated to minimize evidence of the monarchy's systematic persecution of royal family members. Intelligence files describe what palace administrators euphemistically called archival optimization, a bureaucratic process for removing, editing, or reclassifying documents that portrayed royal institutional control in unflattering terms. Archived correspondence shows that court officials systematically reviewed military tribunals, court proceedings, and diplomatic records to eliminate evidence of what preserved documentation calls excessive institutional measures. The most revealing detail emerges from library administration records. Palace archivists were instructed to transfer Augustus's case files to restricted access collections, effectively removing them from general historical research. treasury documents show regular payments to archival staff for special collections management, indicating that the monarchy was purchasing historical censorship to control future narrative about Augustus's destruction. Preserved editing instructions demonstrate the sophisticated nature of this cover-up operation. Archived memoranda show that palace officials developed specific protocols for modifying court records, removing detailed descriptions of surveillance methods, eliminating references to systematic family intimidation, and replacing factual accounts of institutional persecution with sanitized language about administrative adjustments and protocol violations. But what court documentation makes clear is that the archival manipulation extended beyond Augustus's immediate case. Intelligence reports indicate that palace administrators used his punishment as an opportunity to review and sanitize records about other royal family surveillance, marriage investigations, and institutional control mechanisms. They were conducting comprehensive historical revision disguised as routine archive management. The institutional justification appears in preserved legal memoranda. Palace officials argued that detailed documentation about royal surveillance methods could compromise state security if accessed by hostile governments. Archived correspondence suggests this was bureaucratic language for preventing future researchers from understanding the scope and methodology of royal family persecution. Treasury records reveal the financial investment in historical erasure. Archived accounting files show payments for document reproduction, archival transfer, storage facility modification, and personnel training in sensitive collection management. The monarchy was funding systematic historical revision to protect their institutional reputation. But the most disturbing aspect emerges from comparative analysis. Intelligence files suggest that other European monarchies were implementing similar archival sanitization following Augustus's case. Diplomatic correspondence indicates that Prussian archival techniques were shared with Austrian, Russian, and French court administrators, creating an international system for erasing evidence of royal institutional persecution. Contemporary accounts from court observers who witnessed the archival manipulation describe a systematic campaign to transform Augustus from a victim of institutional persecution into a figure of personal moral failure. Preserved private correspondence suggests that even family members began adopting sanitized language when discussing Augustus's fate, indicating successful institutional control over historical narrative. The effectiveness of this cover-up operation appears in historical scholarship patterns. Archived research requests show that for decades following Augustus's disgrace, historians were unable to access comprehensive documentation about his case, resulting in incomplete and often inaccurate accounts that portrayed his destruction as family dysfunction rather than systematic institutional persecution. But what preserved archival administration records cannot explain is how much documentation was permanently destroyed rather than simply restricted, and whether evidence of Augustus's true fate survives in archives that palace officials could not control. The court-martial and systematic destruction of Prince Augustus was not an isolated incident. Archived intelligence documents from across Europe reveal that his case became the template for royal surveillance and persecution mechanisms that would be implemented by monarchies throughout the 19th century. Preserved diplomatic correspondence shows that Prussian techniques for monitoring, investigating, and destroying royal family members were studied, adapted, and exported as institutional methodology for controlling royal romantic autonomy. Court memoranda from the Austrian state archives describe how Habsburg administrators implemented Prussian protocols for royal marriage surveillance following Augustus's case. Intelligence files from the Russian Imperial Archives reveal similar adoption of systematic monitoring techniques, while preserved French diplomatic reports indicate that restored Bourbon monarchy studied Augustus's destruction as a model for preventing royal independence. The most revealing detail emerges from comparative legal analysis. Archived court documents from multiple European monarchies show identical language, procedural structures, and punishment mechanisms modeled directly on Augustus's court-martial. Palace administrators had created an international handbook for destroying royal family members who challenged institutional authority, transforming one prince's persecution into systematic methodology. Treasury records from various European courts reveal the financial scope of this surveillance expansion. Archived accounting files show regular budget allocations for family monitoring services, behavioral assessment programs, and institutional loyalty enforcement. Bureaucratic terms that preserved correspondence indicates meant systematic surveillance of royal romantic relationships using Augustus's case as operational precedent. But what preserved intelligence reports make clear is that Augustus's destruction was part of a broader pattern of royal persecution that extended far beyond marriage control. Documented cases from the same period include Prince Ferdinand of Bavaria, exiled for political independence, Princess Sophia of Württemberg, confined for religious expression, and Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg, stripped of titles for financial autonomy. The institutional effectiveness appears in marriage patterns across European royalty. Preserved genealogical records show dramatic decreases in unauthorized royal marriages following Augustus's case, while court documentation reveals increased applications for institutional marriage permission. The systematic destruction of one prince had successfully intimidated royal families across an entire continent. Intelligence files suggest that Augustus's case established legal precedents that would be used against royal family members for decades. Archived court proceedings from the 1820s, 1830s, and 1840s show direct references to the Augustus precedent, indicating that his destruction became permanent legal justification for institutional persecution of royal romantic autonomy. Contemporary accounts from European court observers describe the transformation of palace life following Augustus's case. Preserved private correspondence suggests that royal family members across multiple monarchies modified their behavior, relationships, and even private communications based on lessons learned from his systematic destruction. The most disturbing aspect emerges from survival analysis. Archived documentation suggests that many royal family members who faced similar persecution did not survive to leave historical records. Intelligence files reference administrative solutions and institutional adjustments for royal family members whose cases never reached documented tribunal proceedings. But what preserved records cannot fully explain is how many other royal lives were quietly erased using techniques perfected through Augustus's destruction, and how this systematic persecution shaped European royal behavior for generations. This is not the only royal life that was quietly erased. Please subscribe to the channel to open the next sealed file.